on and things like that. I know there is concerns with like climate impact, which is definitely a reality. I think most people are, they set the straw man up like, oh, you don't believe the climate changes? No, the climate changes. I think the key is like climate impact. What's going to happen after that? And you have the different places like with Haiti, like you said, in Canada, there's not that much land. Like it's a massive country, but the amount of actual arable, I think arable is the term, where humans can actually live or work off the land is like a tiny strip right by the border. Like majority of it is permafrost. So you have kind of two things happening in the world right now, right by the equator, where the global south, as people say, people are starting to learn and use different things. And then with the climate impact, some places up north, like when they talk about the climate raising, it's actually mostly like it'd be like maybe 3 degrees over the last 200 years up north, where it's a lot colder. But by the equator, it's gone up maybe 0.5. So you have some places where it's like melting. So land is actually spreading and things like that. So that's going to open up more land for more different combinations of soil and climates and things like that to grow different grapes. Because can you tell us a bit about the grapes that grow in different areas and some knowledge about that, and also what you're seeing in emerging markets, if there's any emerging markets that you said, okay, there's some new wine coming from this new country, this new location that seems to be making a splash in the wine community or something, and also the effect of this, the climate changing in places that are more, that have a longer history of having wines in a certain set kind of way, that maybe the temperatures are being changed or land is expanding, or just, I don't know if that's too jumbled of a question.
No, it makes perfect sense. And yeah, everybody's talking about climate change right now, but I agree with you. I think it's like, we're definitely in a warming trend, but I mean, we've seen this throughout history that it's cyclical. Like, there was another point in time where, grapes were found in like Ireland and like Scandinavia. It was the medieval warming period. So it's like, it's just cyclical and it changes over time. And it's like, I'm not denying that climate change exists, but it's like, to what effect have humans like had on it? Right. And so, essentially what's happening right now is it is warming. And so people are moving towards different kind of like aspects. So like, where normally maybe when people plant on like a south facing slope, they're planting on a different aspect, and higher altitude also plays a role as well. And that's also why you find vineyards generally are planted on slopes, because you want the drainage and then you want like the impact of the sun and everything. But in terms of Canada, we're seeing a lot of emerging varieties that are crosses of different styles. So hybrids essentially. So traditionally, the noble varieties that are very well known and commonplace, that have really taken a hold of the market, those are all Vitis vinifera. So that's just like one gene of grapes. And then hybrids are different crosses of different genes. So like Labrusca and all kinds of like different names. And so the argument there is that they don't kind of like have as much complexity or structure or texture as say vinifera does. And so a lot of people are blending those two together. And that's what I encountered when I was in BC a couple of weeks ago when I was on Vancouver Island. They're blending the two to sort of achieve the balance and complexity that you can find elsewhere. But there's still a lot of naysayers and people who are very suspect about the use of hybrids because they just haven't like reached that level or like that pinnacle of quality, because it's still kind of like a process of trial and error. And yeah, you're totally right. Like where like all of the wineries, it's actually on the same latitude as like Champagne. And like, that's why you don't see anything above the 49th parallel in Canada, because otherwise they will not survive. And of course there's little exceptions here and there in tiny little pockets. But even then they're not that common, but there's wineries popping up all over now. Like Quebec is making wine now, Nova Scotia is making wine, and predominantly they're making hybrids, aromatic whites, and sparkling wine. And so when people come and do tastings with me and they want to taste like those big heavy reds, it's like, unless you get it from like a really specific pocket, I'm going to pour you what thrives in Canada. And that's stylistically, I think, what Canada is going to emerge for. Like I said, aromatic whites, sparkling, and then light reds. So like Gamay is very commonplace. And so that's what's really interesting about like kind of like the spread across Canada. There's all these little sort of microclimates, like on Vancouver Island, it's very maritime influence. You actually do get influence from the ocean. So like aerosol sprays will settle on the skins of the grape, and that will translate into like a very like saline forward presenting style of wine. But that can also come from the soil. And that's not to say that the vines are actually absorbing anything from the soil. It's all about like the humus and like the impact and how the vines actually behave and thrive in different soil types. Limestone is very prevalent in Niagara, Prince Edward County, little pockets in the Okanagan, and that tends to produce very like linear, very electric styles of wine. Like Chardonnay loves limestone. And that's why place and terroir, you probably hear this a lot, like when you hear people talking about wine, it's so, so important because you need to find a very specific site for specific varieties. And that will change from like whatever, kilometer to kilometer. Like it's so, so fascinating. And then like, even like one row of grapes will thrive so much better because maybe there's like more nitrogen in that one specific little pocket of like the vineyard. But in terms of varieties, like, across Canada, generally as like an umbrella sort of like term, it's a cool climate growing region. So like I said, Gamay is emerging as a variety that does really well, both in BC, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. Cabernet Franc, so those are like that light red sort of vibe. And then in terms of white varieties, Chardonnay, Pinot Gris. Pinot Gris is something that's coming out as being a variety to be reckoned with. And it's really interesting when I talk to my like wine industry friends, they're like, Pinot Gris, really? Because like they think of like that sort of boring table wine, Pinot Grigio, Santa Margherita. But I mean, wine can be anything that you want it to be, right? Like along the lines of what I was saying before about it's just all this, it's this like this, all these little decisions along the way that you can make and vessels that you can age it in and all of this kind of stuff. And then, sorry, I also forgot to mention Pinot Noir, obviously. Niagara, definitely. And also Vancouver Island. A lot of people like to say that the Okanagan does really well for Pinot Noir, but I have to disagree because it's too desert-like. It does better with like the bigger reds, like South Okanagan Syrah. A lot of people are talking about now. But yeah, I would say those are kind of like the 5 or 6 varieties that like you should look out for. Because there's a lot of people making phenomenal stuff, and Riesling as well. And I mean, there's always exceptions to every rule, but it's just really exciting. And I love to sort of expose and introduce people to all of this stuff, especially producers that they've never heard of, that they wouldn't have otherwise. And they're always really excited, like, wow, I didn't know that this even could, be produced in Canada. So yeah, it's just an exciting time. Did that answer your question? That was like a very like multifaceted.
One last one.
Sorry, go ahead.
One last addition. Is there any, like, what are some of the new, do you have any familiarity with anything coming from outside of Canada that's like a new region that you think, okay, that's somewhere to watch. Right. There's some great stuff coming out from that place.
I mean, there's always emerging regions. I think Australia was kind of written off as sort of just boring, over-extracted, over-oaked, kind of like big, heavy Shiraz, like people just sort of generalize. But there's a lot of really cool stuff coming out of there, and they're kind of a front runner for a lot of natural wine. And then like, again, it always comes down to like little specific pockets like Clare Valley and Eden Valley. They're making some really excellent examples of Riesling and like high altitude stuff. Austria, they've been making wine for a while, but in terms of like the natural community, like Burgenland and other areas surrounding there, there's a whole host of different producers that are making really, really cool stuff. Where else? There was a producer that I've been really excited about from Slovakia. But I mean, these are all places that have been making wine for a long time, but we're only just starting to like get access to them as well. And then Slovenia is another one. Not that it's a new region at all, but like I had the chance to go there a couple of years ago, and I was blown away at the quality of wine that I tasted there. And again, they've been making wine for like thousands of years, so like they've got it like dialed in. It runs the gamut, like Hungary and like, I don't know. I mean, even when I was in India, I went to a winery, and I mean, the wine wasn't that good, but I mean, I love that like they're trying and they're making an effort. And I don't know if India will ever make like globally recognized wine, but I mean, for the locals, like why would they not enjoy what's on offer, right? So
it happens because even just my time back in Kenya, I've been splitting time between Kenya and the States for the last like 10 years, and I was gone for like 17 before that, but just seeing the changes that have happened. When I first got back, when I was of age of drinking, because when I first left, I wasn't. It was mostly just international stuff. And then now, just in the 10 years, there's so many local companies doing their own things and things like that. I don't know if there's any specific Kenyan winery, but I know there's South African wine that comes up. I think some Nigerian places. But these are the things that they do start somewhere. And it's interesting to see these places just coming up and seeing what they. Thank you for listening. This has been a clip from an actual longer recording that I'll try to leave a link to on the screen or somewhere around here where you're listening to this.
Presents. 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 Presents.
Peasants.
Okay. Okay.